Welcome to Make Your Website Site Selector Friendly, a webinar featuring Jason Hickey, President of Hickey Associates. Hickey Associates is a global site selection and public incentive support firm representing a diverse set of industries from consumer products and healthcare to defense to renewable energy. Clients include United Healthcare Group, Lockheed Martin, General Mills, and many others. Jason specializes in location selection strategies, federal incentives, loan guarantee grants, and full public-private partnerships. While working for the firm, Jason has also assisted elected officials at both the federal and state level to develop public policy recommendations, including the White House Domestic Policy Council. Jason is a graduate of Northwestern University and serves as an officer of the Northwestern University Alumni Association. Professional service includes the Industrial Asset Management Council Site Selection Committee, membership of the State of Minnesota Economic Development Cabinet, as well as a founding partner of the Site Selectors Guild.
Hi everyone, this is Jason Hickey from Hickey Associates, LLC. Very much appreciate your time today and joining us talking about this very important topic, and that's making your website site selector friendly. What that means is essentially utilizing the different tools to simplify what we do every day in the site selection profession, and that is to research on behalf of our clients the best site and the right location for them to expand, invest, or entirely move. And what goes into a company's decision? Well, quite a few things. It starts out with the business requirements, which are extremely important, the location requirements, and then also the cost of doing business. The cost of doing business is incredibly important to make sure that that all of the pieces that come into play within the business case is met. And so if you don't have those business requirements and location requirements met, then you can't really make a location decision in a particular community or state or region. So website tools, the critical components to what we call a stress-free site search. There's four major components, and that's to make sure, and this is absolutely critical, that if you include data, any set of data within your website, make sure it's real-time and accurate. We are always triple checking all of the data that we collect off the internet, but it makes it a whole lot easier to any kind of site selector, either a advisory firm like ourselves or businesses actually doing the site selection on their own, to make sure that that information is accurate. Because later on down the line, we'll continue to benchmark that information, and if there's any kind of inaccuracy, you can immediately eliminate your community after much has been involved, discussions and all that, just because a single very, very important critical data piece was inaccurately portrayed. We want to make sure that there are statistics as well on the website that accentuate not only the strengths but the challenges. It is clear from the forefront the challenges are incredibly important, and that give us the kinds of knowledge that allows us to double check against other areas that may also have the same challenges, but have your area may have a greater strength to overcome that. So it's important to address both. Many businesses, just on their own, realize the challenges are locally, and we'll talk about at the end what ultimately site selectors are evaluating through website tools and other means. But the strengths are just as important to the challenges, to make sure that those are accentuated and answered on your website. Photos, graphical elements, and other means of very, very colorful but also informational aspects of websites, especially the things that make it easier to find sites and find information, are incredibly important. And we'll use some examples here in a moment to show sites that do a great job in doing that, both previous and then now with some of the new technology, which is pretty neat. And then outlining special zones. Every state and often many communities have specialized zones that they've set aside. The common phrase is enterprise zone, but there's many other zones that exist, from military use zones to specialized renewable energy areas that if a company is interested in making those kinds of investments, it'll be very important to them to understand where these zones are. So it's incredibly important on your website that you do a great job in showing where those are, all the way down to the address level. So here's an example, and I don't mean to mention any kind of specific or call out any specific website, but we've done projects in all of these different locations, and saw it fit to, at least because we have had experience in these places, to show you some of the different websites we've come across. In Hernando County, Florida, they've done a great job in outlining their enterprise zones. As you can see here on the website, they talk about not only the zones, but what it means within the zone program and those tax credits. It's a great resource for not only site selectors, but companies that are doing an initial search, which we see more and more companies do, on just seeing what's out there and what their business case might entail. So as you can see here, it gives the ability to click on this website and show the enterprise zone, and to show that number 2701, it encompasses these areas between these streets. The issue is that it doesn't allow us to get down to the actual street level and get down to double-checking address to make sure it's in a zone, which is an incredibly important piece of the puzzle if a company is considering either placing or purchasing or whatever it may be, some kind of investment within one of these zones. What we've seen a better solution to be is that in outlining these special zones, it allows an interactivity function to get down to the street level to either search or at least zoom in so that we can see on a map where that enterprise zone is. As you can see here in Buffalo, with their site, it actually allows them to look at this type of website and drill in and look at this zone to make sure that a single facility is within that specialized area. Other kind of graphical comparison tools include doing extensive research on not only what is available as far as sites, but much beyond that. Many companies are concerned about competition as well as synergies that exist within a certain area. Competition because, A, of proprietary nature information, as well as the labor draw. If there is a single very, very large investment happening multiply at the same time, companies become very concerned about the labor market accessibility. Synergies exist as well, as that if there's either major or minor investment happening within an area, there may be areas of supply chain investment that may have occurred. There's lots of areas around the country that are seeing this. Two great examples are the Rolls-Royce facility right outside of Richmond. There's a lot of supply chain moving into that area, and that they looked at that specific location as a way that it could synergize that specific supply chain to move into that area, or some of it had already existed. Another great example is down in Texas, the new Caterpillar facility and all the supply chain that's moving to the different regions within Texas. The same thing, that company saw as a major draw to the area, that they would have some synergies there as well. And then important to both of these competition and synergy strategies in identifying sites is that to look for industry clusters. If you are building a facility that requires a lot of rocket scientists, you want to move to an area that is going to have a lot of rocket scientists, and that's going to require an already very in-depth investment into the foundation of those types of skill sets, which means that the industry will already have taken hold. Computer science and computer kinds of programming are another great example of where that's happening now. Everybody knows Silicon Valley, and Austin, Texas is becoming another great center of those kinds of activities with computerized websites and things like that. But Pittsburgh, Washington, D.C., Raleigh-Durham, and other areas are also becoming major centers of investment. And if the quicker a site selection or company can identify where those industry clusters are, they've seen the investment, they know that other companies have done it, and it's very important for them to identify that quickly. So we often get asked the question, to answer, is it important to show available properties? And the answer is always absolutely yes. If we can interject in the site selection process, even if it's just based on scientific data points and statistical benchmarking, if we can look at actual sites, especially as more and more companies look at second generation existing buildings to reinvest in, they'll want to know what properties actually exist out there to basemark that as well. And so so it's extremely important to show it in a way that makes sense. Also, some additional things that when comparing these different tools, it's incredibly important from a site selector's perspective to look at things that may or may not come out immediately on just doing an initial search that are becoming more important. Are there the kinds of quality of life things happening in that region that would attract a younger population to stay? Are they already being trained in the universities and colleges locally? Is there a good employment base for spousal employment if relocation is required to that area? Some very, very important factors that are becoming extremely important to, again, those C-suite decision makers that are making those site decisions. The social media environment has also become a very important site selection tool. Many of you in the economic development community have done a great job in investing within social media. But that's an important element of any website, is to make sure that it's all linked together. What we follow using social media as the site selection tool is we follow economic development and regulatory agencies. Many economic development companies, organizations, and so on make announcements on a regular basis. And we use our Twitter account as well as other means to be able to search these things out in real time. But regulatory agencies do the same thing. IRS, FASB, organizations that are extremely important to the day-to-day operations of the things that we analyze have used Twitter in a major way to get the message out quicker. We use social media also for industry updates and then asking for help, solutions to complex issues. Encourage you all that as these projects become more complex to be able to close, to be able to even attract, we use, and we've seen more and more economic development communities and organizations and leaders use social media as a way to ask help for complex issues. The three major social media environments are Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. We use Facebook as a way to look at community profiles that link back for additional data. LinkedIn, develop the best community contact, which sometimes on websites is clear. Sometimes it's not. There was a website we were dealing with recently that only had the contact information for the chief marketing officer, and that didn't really get us to the exact person we wanted to talk to. It was a requirement that we need to do immediate research within a 24-hour turnaround, and we needed that person immediately. And it unfortunately, their information, because it took that additional time to be able to get to that right person, was not included in that initial research in that community's profile. So it's important to make sure not only using LinkedIn but on your website, include the information of the best contact person, if it's a regional, industrial, wherever it is, easy to find. And then Twitter, we review tweets all the time to determine what the current environment is, not only here within the U.S. but internationally. There are many international things happening on a real-time basis right now in regions in the Middle East and in Asia that are very fluid, and that we review Twitter pages to see what's happening on the ground at any given moment. And then there's these other social media environment sites outside of the U.S. Badoo is Latin American, and you can see that RenRen and even SciWorld in South Korea are becoming important social media interactive sites that we use these every day to identify trends that are happening on the ground. Some of them include other facets of gaming and things like that, but they are becoming very, very social media directed in a way that we know that LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook are as well. But Facebook still remains at about 650 million users, give or take, I think a few million, as the single source for information across the world. So a lot of people ask, so what does this all mean to a site selector? And the major task that we try to evaluate is the risk. At the end of the day, we want to look at what these different facets of risk involve for a company to come into a community and invest. or stay in a community, or do some kind of activity outside of something that they've already planned on doing. Like I mentioned, many site selection activities now include things that are 5 to 10 years planned out. Other activities include things that are happening right now in real space, and definitely encourage you when you do get contacted by a site selector to ask them when you're asked to provide some information, what kind of time frame the response and the feedback will be given back, because it does range nowadays in the kind of strategic planning that many of us site selectors are involved in. But we evaluate these 5 major risks, and that's political, is it business friendly, unionization is a big piece, as well as many of you in your states and regions have seen a lot of political transition, especially last November. What does that mean from the state on down? Federal as well has seen a lot of transition. Economic development risk, natural disaster risk is extremely important. And when we talk about strengths and challenges, many areas are challenged by natural disasters all the time. And one of the major site selection criteria is how many presidential disaster areas have been declared over the last 2 to 5 years. And so that doesn't necessarily discount any community over another. Many areas that may have a lot of short-term natural disasters that may have happened in the last year or 2 years or 3 years may have not had that same series of bad luck in the last 10. So don't automatically discount yourself for projects. Just make sure that on your website to start with, it identifies these kinds of challenges and gives the kind of data points that shows, well, if there's a stereotype about that challenge that that either a company or a site selector can easily overcome. Operational risk, utilities and supply chain are becoming incredibly important. Utility rates are going up. Some utility rates are skyrocketing in many communities in certain areas of the country. And the supply chain, what we've seen a lot more is becoming closer to where the distribution is in the market is, to be able to standardize and slow down that growth of not only utilities, but supply chain goes into logistical costs and everything. As well as what kind of competition is in the area. Not intellectual property risk is very important. It's more on an international basis. You'll see as a concern for companies coming from overseas that intellectual property is a concern because of competition in the area, and that's something that you'll want to just address on a competition standpoint. But all of these combined, the more information that you have on your website, and the more that you're able to address it in a geographical way, the easier it is for not only U.S.-based companies and site consultants, but for international companies that are often coming over from overseas looking to make investments in the U.S. Have these really unique stereotypes about different areas. And graphically speaking, because of language barriers and cultural barriers, graphical elements will be able to explain what those synergies are on their website itself. So make sure that you're addressing all these on your website. It's absolutely critical, and very much appreciate the time today. Feel free to reach out to me personally or anyone in our team anytime. We can provide any additional value, and we're looking forward to your questions. Thank you so much.
So Jason, I'm going to read the first question to you. Should economic development websites make industry data searchable and display it on an interactive map? Does that help you?
Yes. Yes, it does. And it's incredibly important to the kinds of organizations that do their own searching initially. We see a lot of smaller businesses that are looking to grow, have been in the same location for 10, 20 years, maybe even more, maybe 100 years. And they know that that location may not be the best for them anymore. The markets have changed and their supply chain has changed. And what we've seen a lot is that the CEO and the C-suite folks within that organization will look at these websites first and then contact the site selector to then engage on a more formal scientific basis on looking at these different data points. But to have not only industry, but as much information represented graphically searchable on your website is critical. Not only because it's important for the site search process, but also because as economic developers, you're often put in a position that you have to compare apples to apples between communities and states and regions. If your identified competitors have these tools, then I would highly suggest you doing the same immediately, because it's just something that is part of any kind of technology. If it's easier to analyze one apple as compared to the other, it's going to create just more of a either a negative or positive sense, but definitely a sense of that community quicker than looking together. That's a great question.
Okay, next question. Which do you trust more when you see it on a website? Data provided by economic development organizations or data from third-party national data vendors?
That is also a really great question. Third-party vendors are a critical part of the piece of doing data research. We often rely on out of our Washington, D.C. office, tapping into the federal government sources of many of the labor and economic statistics that we'll draw from to be able to build a site selection matrix and analysis. However, economic development groups putting information on their website is also critical as well. There's certain things that locally you've done impact studies on, you've done analyses on, you've done interviews on. That is an important key point, that in an initial macro analysis within site selection, it's important to include those things, and then as it becomes, your community may become a critical last finalist for a site based on all kind of different parameters. Those are points that we'll want to benchmark and do our due diligence on, but it does provide the things that that a site selector would at least initially need to know and want to include in their macro study.
Okay, next question. We serve a large area, and the characteristics of our labor force are different on one side of our county than the other side of the county. How can we show you the geographic differences on our website? Should we have address or property-centered demographics?
That's another great question. They should always be address-centered statistics and data. A site isn't necessarily looking at eventually the site's going to have an address. So if you start from a basis of displaying either geographically or just with data points, that starting with that address, zooming out to different regions, especially over the next handful of years, everything is going to be existing building base for the most part, unless there's a very unique requirement. So it's something that that if you base it off the address first, it's just going to show that maybe one half of the county may not have the right kinds of synergies to that company as the other one would. But at the end of the day, if it's a significant labor pull from the community, of 50 jobs or more, both sides of the county is going to be positively affected, as well as most likely the surrounding region. No jobs are only hired from one specific area or city. They're often shared across, depending on the area. Some people drive as long as 100 miles, at least temporarily, to go to a new job. So it's important to understand what's happening on the ground at that address. It's also important to make sure that the information is shared across the entire region. And that's what a lot of labor analyses will show in us who do site selection as a practice and advisory. Will show those different trends as people are willing to travel distances. And that's something, too, is that if it's possible to show that on your website as well, that's extremely important.
Okay, next question. When you're searching for a community on a search engine, what are some of the terms you typically search for? Essentially, how do you find their website?
We use the major search engines like Yahoo and Bing and Google. Most economic development sites are pretty easy to find. It's just a matter of typing in the name of the community that's been identified. That's the easy part. The easy part is that when we're looking for websites, it's easy to find if you already know what you're looking for, if you already know the community in question. If you're looking at a region that is just as, let's say, as big as the East Coast, or the Northeast area of the country, it's a little bit different. We've seen a great tool in some of our industry publications, as well as the online versions, as well as regional authorities that streamline the information a little easier. There's been many great examples of regional organizations that you all know of Charlotte Regional Partnership. There's a new regional partnership up in Minneapolis area. The regional partnership that's around the Philadelphia region that includes 3 states. Washington, D.C. is in the surrounding areas of Virginia and Maryland have a great partnership as well. And those are just a few examples. There's many of them. And those are great resources for companies knowing that they need to do business in, let's say, the Philadelphia area, or they need to do business in Fort Wayne, Dallas area, but don't necessarily know the individual communities within it. So those are great resources, and that gets you to the websites in general. Another resource that we use actually a lot is the Economic Development Database that's on the web. Many of you are listed on there, and it's a great tool to find things quickly and efficiently to be able to get to your specific website. Before we go on to the next question, one thing that's important to add is search engine optimization, which is incredibly important. That whatever investment you make, we have a website just like you have a website, and we do this all the time to make sure that we're optimized. That if somebody types in site selection, if somebody types in your community, especially the specific industries you may be going after as strategy, you make sure that your site is optimized, not only within the text and the content within the site, but also can you optimize the graphical elements? And there's a uniqueness to that I definitely encourage you to look at a professional to help you with, just because there is a lot of people trying to get in front of these search engines, and there's very unique, cost-effective ways that a service provider can add to that.
All right, next question. When you were developing your initial long list of potential locations, are you doing more of your research by talking to economic development organizations or visiting their websites first?
We're visiting their websites first. We're lucky enough to have a lot of great relationships in areas all over the country. I did mention earlier, we've got about 150 projects that we're working on right now. So we probably, many of you on the phone, we've had the opportunity to either work with you now or work with you in the recent past, and hopefully in the future. But as a whole, when we're working on what we would call our macro analysis, that long list, we're doing a lot of research on websites, coupling that with data points that we've already built within our database. So that's why websites are critical. The quicker that our research staff and our analysts and project managers can find information as they build this long list macro search, the better. And we've seen a great uptick in information flow on many websites now that it just has the data points up there up front so that people can go to it. It's not just about making the announcements, which are critical too. Companies, it's important. Companies pay attention when big announcements are made. Site selectors pay attention when big announcements are made, because we see a major Fortune 500, even Fortune 1000 company making investment in your community, and it's hard not to think, well, wow, there's obviously some synergies there that they found. So that's important to talk about. But if it doesn't meet the data criteria that's important to that specific project, it's still not going to work. So make sure that those things are upfront or easily accessible. And again, the graphical representation of any data set is extremely important in this day and age, because it allows you to move the information around that is just truly unique and revolutionary that we've only seen in the last few years. But websites are that, to answer your question, the websites are that critical function of that first long list search.
All right, and a follow-up question to that, Jason, if you are researching communities online first, do economic development organizations even know that they are being eliminated before they are eliminated?
The answer is no. And this is our best practice, is that often there's some site selection professionals that will send out a large RFP for information. We've done a really unique and we think a very innovative way in collecting a lot of information, so we don't have to do that when looking at realistically 12 to 20 states, and that it becomes a very burdensome process, I think, for many economic development professionals to respond to these RFPs when when site selectors often can drill down to a specific region or set of regions very quickly, especially when it's based on an actual site, and if that site is what is often referred to as site ready. But often what happens is that economic development professional or leader or organization is not aware that we are doing that kind of research because it's a long, drawn-out process, and it's something that many of you have seen diminished resources, have seen challenges in budgets and things like that. Just probably don't have the time to address. However, when it gets to that key list of 5 to 6 or 7 at the most sites and locations or locations, let's just say, that's when we'll try to get that client or that team of clients interacting with the economic development professionals, because at the end of the day, you're the ones that know best about your community. And, we'll try to set up visits or at least calls and virtual meetings so you can have that opportunity to interact and educate them on what's happening on the ground.
All right, next question. For workforce data, what do you look for that can be provided on a website?
And that's a great question, because workforce is important. There's a lot of companies that are willing to make investments into areas that stereotypically they might not want to. I'm going to go back to use an example, or may not think, and that's like Google in Pittsburgh. That was a risk for them, and that when looking at some of their types of site selection factors that were used, it's something that was very indicative of understanding that there was a great market there. There's a lot of things going on within the university system, and that people wanted to stay in Pittsburgh. But there hadn't been a major investment in the types of things that they do there now, and that have been very successful to do there. The things may not be readily accessible within the data points that the Department of Labor at the U.S. federal government level may have. That's why, as part of their process, they look very, very closely at doing interviews, doing the kinds of group interactions that were happening on the ground that really told them, wow, there's really something happening here, and that we don't have to do business in areas that we stereotypically have done in the past, and we can actually become more involved in this community, and it's within their business cases a lot, very, very cost effective. So to answer your question around labor force statistics are done on many different levels, from the federal, state, and even on the local level. But to have that available, searchable all the way up to the specific code, companies are sophisticated now that they know that they have to meet a certain code requirement, NCIS code, or there's a few other coding methodologies out there that it's important to address that much detail on your website and have that very, very accessible. It can be within a certain larger region, because like I'd mentioned, regionalism is becoming more important and very accepted amongst companies making investments because they know people are willing to drive a certain amount of distance. But if you're 100 miles away from an area where a certain skill set is, realistically, those people, if they're going to drive back and forth and commute, they're only going to do it for a short time. And so, while it's important to show all this data, do it in a way that's realistic and accurate.
All right. Next question. Name some types of web content that you commonly find on websites that is of no value to you.
That's a great question. I've been on all kind of panels, and my colleagues have been on panels, and with other site selectors, and we're always asked about, well, what kind of marketing materials work. Websites work, but there are things within websites that just are overlooked immediately. Certain local things are incredibly important to put towards your local economic development activities. We know that many organizations are multi-hat. They wear all kind of different hats to be able to address what's happening nationally and internationally, as well as what's happening on the ground, to be able to help businesses retain employees and grow locally too. So it's hard to put on a website exactly what's needed. Geographically, if incorporating that's one thing that helps, because it allows a user to drill down to the things that he or she may or may not want to see within a data search. But beyond that, there are certain things that people want to see immediately, and that's announcements, data, and contacts. What they don't want to see as much is things that may have happened that aren't relevant to, and I can just speak of larger national, regional searches. When our team goes onto websites, the things that aren't pertinent to them on a local level are just not pertinent. And while it's important to display those things within the economic development realm in your organization, it needs to be framed in a way that it's away from the activities of doing site selection. It's important for site selectors, but it's critically important. Many of you know that 50% of the projects that are cited every year are done without site selectors. So while we convince them all the time that they should try to use services of the likes that we have, but you can often see that their understanding of the site selection practice is sometimes not as thorough and is not as advanced as the site selector would be able to provide. And so the more random information you have on your website front and center on your home pages, it can get lost in translation for those folks doing it on their own. And even those professionals that might be within real estate, tax, and even C-suite that just might be poking around in communities, the same thing. Make sure that things are readily accessible and that information that doesn't need to be necessarily put up front is not put up front. Things like videos, pictures, things like that are also very helpful, but if somebody really wants to watch a video, they can search those things within the website as well within a couple of clicks. So the data points and the graphical elements are important to be able to access right away at the beginning. Making sure people understand the community too is something incredibly important when you first log in. But beyond that, it's important that some of that other information gets tucked back a little bit for users that are going for the reason of being able to find those things either locally or nationally.
All right, and the last question is about social media. You talked about the importance of social media, and I'm curious how often you use Facebook compared with LinkedIn and Twitter, and how valuable are they in the site selection process?
That's a great question. LinkedIn it's clear that is a resume career building tool that interaction is all professional. There's some personal aspects to it, but it's predominantly used for business and professional reasons. Twitter is something. It's the next generation of blogging, and about the third generation of what I remember when we first got Prodigy in our house. If you all remember Prodigy before even AOL, there were these chat rooms, and that's kind of probably the fourth, even fifth generation of a chat room is Twitter in a very, very sophisticated new age way. But with Facebook is a little bit different because people look at Facebook in a very personal way, and that while I think it's critical that economic development organizations have Facebook sites, because it's not as important for national companies and even regional companies, but it's really important for your partners locally to interact with you on their Facebook page, to what they call like you, and because there's a lot of pride in those organizations to you locally, and a state is not anything that's a departure from that as well, and that what we see a lot in the company representatives that we know and site selectors that we know that while we have to remain impartial, we'll see a lot of people like organizations that may be their hometown or maybe they're something that may make sense from a business or economic development standpoint. So we currently, these things are very evolving, but we see that as the major synergy for Facebook. So something that I always try to keep in mind, and our company tries to keep in mind, is economic development is two-sided. It's attracting and retaining your local businesses just as much as you would new. And so your website and your social media strategies need to cover both things and do it in a very effective way? It's a great question, though.
All right. Well, thank you, Jason.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, everyone.